They say betrayal tastes like bitter almonds, but I never imagined I'd be the one serving it on a silver platter. My name is Margaret Lewis. I'm 62 years old, and I live in Portsmouth, England. What I'm about to tell you will shock you to your core, because on the night of my 40th wedding anniversary, I discovered my husband Robert in bed with our daughter-in-law Emily. And what I did next? Well, let me start from the beginning. I had spent 40 years building a life with Robert Lewis, 40 years of sacrifice, of standing by his side while he built his shipping business from nothing. I was 22 when we married, fresh out of university with dreams of becoming an architect. But Robert needed me, and I chose love over ambition. I invested my inheritance, $75,000 from my grandmother, into his struggling company. I worked 16-hour days alongside him, managing accounts, sweet-talking clients, even scrubbing the office floors when we couldn't afford cleaning staff. Our son Michael came along when I was 24, and life became even more complicated. I juggled motherhood and business, often bringing Michael to the office in his pram while I handled invoices and contracts. Robert's company eventually flourished, but by then, my architectural dreams had turned to dust. Still, I told myself it was worth it. We had built something together. We had a family. We had love. Or so I thought. Michael grew into a fine young man and married Emily 6 years ago. She was beautiful, charming, and 24 years old, exactly half Robert's age. I welcomed her with open arms, treated her like the daughter I never had. I even gave them $120,000 as a wedding gift to help them buy their first home. Emily seemed sweet, always complimenting my cooking, helping with family gatherings, calling me Mum with what I believed was genuine affection. Our 40th wedding anniversary was approaching, and I had planned an intimate celebration. Just family, Michael, Emily, and a few close relatives. I'd spent weeks preparing, organizing caterers, decorating our Portsmouth home overlooking the harbor. Robert seemed distracted, but I attributed it to work stress. His company was worth millions now, and he was always juggling deals. The day before the anniversary, I went upstairs to check on the guest room where Emily and Michael would be staying. The door was slightly ajar, and I heard sounds, soft whispers, movement. Something made me pause. Perhaps it was instinct, perhaps fate, but I pushed the door open just a crack. What I saw destroyed me. Robert, my husband of nearly 40 years, was in bed with Emily, our daughter-in-law. His hands were in her hair. Her lips were on his neck. They were so engrossed in each other they didn't hear me. My heart stopped. My vision blurred. Every memory, every sacrifice, every moment of our life together shattered like glass. I could have screamed. I could have stormed in. But decades of composure took over. I quietly closed the door, my hands trembling so violently I thought I might collapse. I walked downstairs like a ghost, my mind racing with rage, humiliation, and something darker, revenge. That evening, I served dinner as usual. My hands were steady now, guided by cold determination. I smiled at Robert, at Emily, at my oblivious son Michael. I poured wine, and then I raised my glass. "This wine is for two very special people," I announced, looking directly at Robert and Emily. They exchanged a quick, nervous glance, but drank happily, thinking perhaps I was toasting them innocently. They had no idea what I'd put in their glasses. The next morning, my phone rang at dawn. Robert's voice was panicked, hoarse. "Margaret, what did you do? We're at the hospital. Emily and I. We're sick. What was in that wine?" I smiled into the phone, my voice calm as ice. "You'll find out soon enough, Robert. You both will." If you're enjoying this story and want to know what happens next, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Also, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Your support means everything to me. And trust me, this story is just beginning. The hospital corridors smelled of antiseptic and fear. I walked through them with my head held high, carrying a bouquet of white lilies, flowers traditionally given to the dying. Symbolic, perhaps dramatic, but I wanted Robert and Emily to understand the gravity of what they'd done. Michael had called me frantically that morning, his voice breaking with confusion and terror. "Mum, Dad, and Emily are in hospital. They're both violently ill. The doctors are running tests. What happened at dinner last night? Did you notice anything wrong with the food?" Oh, how innocent my son was, how blissfully unaware that his wife and father had been betraying him, betraying me, destroying our family from within. I told Michael I'd come immediately, that I was worried sick. The lie tasted bitter, but not as bitter as the betrayal I'd swallowed the day before. When I arrived at Portsmouth General Hospital, I found Michael pacing outside the private ward, his face pale with worry. He embraced me immediately, and I felt a pang of genuine pain. My son didn't deserve this. He was the one truly innocent victim in this sordid affair. "They're stable now," he said, relief flooding his features. But Mum, it was terrifying. They both started vomiting around midnight, severe stomach cramps, dizziness. Dad thought it was food poisoning, but Emily, she was convinced something was wrong with the wine. I maintained my composure, my face a perfect mask of concern. The wine? But I opened a fresh bottle, one we'd been saving for the anniversary. How strange. Michael led me into the room. Robert was in one bed, Emily in another, both hooked up to IV drips. They looked miserable, exactly as they deserved. Robert's face was gray, his usually commanding presence diminished by the hospital gown and his weakened state. Emily looked even worse, her beautiful face drawn and pale. The moment Robert saw me, his eyes widened with something between fear and fury. "Margaret," he croaked, "we need to talk. Alone." I smiled sweetly at Michael. "Darling, could you get me some tea from the cafeteria? I need a moment with your father." Once Michael left, I approached Robert's bedside slowly, deliberately. Emily tried to sit up in her bed, but the effort made her grimace in pain. "Good. What did you give us?" Robert demanded, his voice weak but angry. "The doctors said we ingested something that caused severe gastric distress, but it's nothing they can identify easily." "What was it, Margaret?" I pulled a chair close to his bed and sat down, crossing my legs elegantly. "Syrup of ipecac," I said calmly. "A powerful emetic, causes violent vomiting, cramps, general misery. Completely leaves the system within 24 hours. Nothing permanent, nothing deadly, just profoundly unpleasant. I wanted you to feel just a fraction of the sickness I felt when I saw you two together." Emily gasped from her bed. "You knew?" I turned to her slowly, my gaze cold as winter frost. "I saw you, Emily. Yesterday afternoon, in the guest room. My husband, your father-in-law, with his hands all over you." "Tell me, how long has this been going on?" Robert tried to speak, but I held up my hand. "Don't bother lying. I deserve the truth after 40 years. Emily started crying, but they were tears of shame, not genuine remorse. 6 months, she whispered. "It started 6 months ago. 6 months. Half a year of lies, sneaking around, making a fool of me and Michael." I felt rage burn through my chest, but I kept my voice level. "And my son, does he know?" "No!" Emily cried out. "Margaret, please. You can't tell him. It would destroy him." I laughed, a sound without humor. "Destroy him? You've already done that, Emily. You've destroyed this entire family, and you—" I turned to Robert. "You've destroyed 40 years of marriage, of partnership, of everything we built together." Robert had the decency to look away. "Margaret, I don't know what happened. Emily and I, You just what, Robert? Fell in love? Had an irresistible connection? Please, spare me the romantic justifications. You're a 52-year-old man who betrayed his wife with his daughter-in-law. There's no poetry in that, just pathetic, predictable weakness." The door opened and Michael returned with tea. I immediately shifted my demeanor, becoming the concerned wife again. "Oh, darling, thank you. Your father and I were just discussing how this might have happened. Perhaps someone at the catering company made an error?" Michael bought it completely, sitting down with his own coffee. "The doctors want to keep them overnight for observation. They should be fine by tomorrow." "Wonderful," I said, sipping my tea while maintaining eye contact with Robert. "I'm sure they'll make a full recovery. After all, what doesn't kill us makes us stronger, isn't that right, Robert?" His eyes held a mixture of fear and understanding. He knew this was just the beginning. The poison in the wine was merely my opening move in a much longer game. The next evening, Robert and Emily were released from the hospital, both still weak but medically cleared. The doctors had concluded it was an unexplained incident of food poisoning, unable to trace the syrup of ipecac I'd carefully dissolved in their wine. Michael insisted we reschedule our anniversary celebration for that very night, wanting to salvage something positive from the frightening episode. I agreed with a gracious smile, though my mind was orchestrating something far more devastating than a simple dinner party. I had spent the entire day making phone calls, gathering information, and preparing for the performance of my lifetime. If Robert and Emily thought a night of vomiting was punishment enough, they were gravely mistaken. I set our dining table with our finest china, the Wedgwood set we'd received as a wedding gift 40 years ago. Each plate represented a year of marriage, a year of my devotion, a year of lies I'd apparently been living. I prepared Robert's favorite meal, beef Wellington with roasted vegetables and a rich red wine reduction. The irony of serving wine again wasn't lost on me, and I could see both Robert and Emily eye their glasses nervously when I poured from a new bottle. "Don't worry," I said sweetly. "This one is perfectly safe. I wouldn't dream of ruining our anniversary twice." Michael raised his glass, oblivious to the tension crackling through the room. "To Mum and Dad, 40 years of marriage, an inspiration to us all." Emily nearly choked on her wine at those words. Robert's face went through several shades of red. I simply smiled and took a delicate sip. "Thank you, darling," I said to Michael. "Your father and I have certainly built something remarkable together, haven't we, Robert? A business worth approximately $8 million, a beautiful home, a wonderful son. Though I must admit, I've been thinking a lot about contributions lately." Robert's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Contributions?" "Yes," I continued conversationally, cutting into my beef with precise movements. "I was looking through our old financial records today, feeling rather nostalgic, given the anniversary. Did you know, Emily, that when Robert and I started his shipping company, I invested my entire inheritance? $75,000 from my grandmother. In 1985, that was a substantial sum." Emily shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Michael looked confused. "Mom, where is this going?" "Oh, just reminiscing, dear. You see, I also worked without salary for the first 10 years while the company grew. If I'd been paid a proper manager's salary, let's say $30,000 annually back then, that would have been $300,000 in wages alone, not to mention the overtime, the weekends, the sacrifices." Robert set down his fork, his voice tight. "Margaret, this isn't the time." "When is the time, Robert?" I interrupted, my voice still pleasant, but with steel underneath. "When would be the perfect moment to discuss how I gave up my career as an architect, how I poured every penny and every hour into building your company, how I raised our son while managing your accounts?" "Mom, you're scaring me," Michael said quietly. I reached over and patted his hand. "Don't be scared, darling. I'm simply acknowledging reality. You see, I had a very interesting conversation with my solicitor today. Mr. Harrison was quite illuminating about marital property and business partnerships." Robert's face went pale. "You spoke to Harrison?" "Of course I did. And he reminded me that under English law, I'm entitled to a significant portion of the business I helped build. He estimated that my contributions over 40 years, financial, labor, and opportunity cost, would entitle me to at least 50% of the company's current value. That would be $4 million, Robert. £4 million. The number hung in the air like a guillotine. Emily's eyes widened. Michael looked between us, confusion turning to dawning horror. Robert's hands were shaking. "But that's not all," I continued, enjoying the moment perhaps more than I should have. "Mr. Harrison also informed me that adultery, while no longer required for divorce proceedings in England, can certainly influence financial settlements, particularly when the adultery involves a family member and demonstrates a pattern of deception and betrayal." "Wait," Michael said, his voice breaking. "Adultery? Dad, what is Mum talking about?" This was the moment I'd been building toward. The poison in the wine had been emotional satisfaction. But this was the true revenge. I looked at my son, seeing the innocence about to be shattered, and for a moment, I almost stopped. But he deserved to know the truth. "Michael," I said gently, 2 days ago, I walked into the guest room and found your father and your wife in bed together." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael's face went through a journey of emotions, disbelief, confusion, realization, and finally, devastating heartbreak. "No," he whispered. "No, that's not. Emily? Dad? Tell her it's not true." Emily burst into tears, but she couldn't form words. Robert tried to speak. "Son, we didn't mean—" Michael stood up so violently his chair fell backward. "How long?" he demanded, his voice raw with pain. 6 months, I answered when neither of them spoke. "They've been carrying on for 6 months. Michael looked at his wife, at his father, at the wreckage of his family, and something broke in his eyes. Without another word, He turned and walked out of the house. We heard his car start, the tires screech as he drove away into the night. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my study, surrounded by 40 years of memories, wedding photos, family portraits, documents from the business we'd built together. Each image now carried the stain of betrayal. Robert had retreated to the guest room, the very room where I'd caught him with Emily. The irony was almost poetic. Emily had fled to her and Michael's home around midnight, her face streaked with tears and mascara. I'd watched her leave from my window, feeling nothing. The woman I'd welcomed into our family, the woman I'd given $120,000 to help start her married life, had repaid my generosity by destroying it. At dawn, my phone rang. It was Michael, his voice hoarse from crying. "Mom, I'm at a hotel. I can't process this. My wife and my father? How could they do this to us?" My heart broke for him in a way it hadn't broken for myself. My pain was the pain of betrayal, but his was the pain of innocence lost, of discovering that the two people he loved most in the world had conspired to hurt him. "Come home, darling," I said softly. "Not to the house. Come to the cottage in Cornwall. Remember our place in Tintagel? It's just us now. We need to figure out what comes next." After hanging up with Michael, I drafted an email to Mr. Harrison, my solicitor. In clinical, precise language, I detailed everything: the affair, the timeline, the evidence I'd gathered. I attached photos I'd taken on my phone before closing that guest room door, insurance I'd had the presence of mind to collect even in my shock. I also requested he begin immediate proceedings for divorce and a forensic audit of Lewis Shipping Limited. Robert appeared in the doorway of my study at 7 in the morning, looking haggard and older than his 52 years. "Margaret, we need to talk." "No, Robert, we really don't. You need to listen." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Sit." He sat, and for the first time in our marriage, I saw him as he truly was. Not the ambitious young man I'd fallen in love with, not the business partner I'd supported, but a weak, selfish man who'd thrown away everything for a cliched affair with a younger woman. "I've instructed Mr. Harrison to begin divorce proceedings," I stated flatly. "I'm claiming 50% of Lewis Shipping, which I am legally entitled to given my financial and labor contributions. I'm also claiming this house, which was purchased partially with my inheritance money. You'll be receiving the papers within the week." "Margaret, you can't," he started. "I can, and I will," I interrupted. "But that's not all. I've also contacted the board of directors at Lewis Shipping. All 12 members received an email from me this morning detailing the situation. You see, Robert, the board includes several investors who are quite conservative in their values. I wonder how they'll feel, knowing their CEO was having an affair with his daughter-in-law." Robert's face went gray. "You wouldn't destroy the company we built together." "We?" I laughed bitterly. "You mean the company I funded, that I worked for without pay, that I sacrificed my career for? That company? Robert, I'm not destroying it. I'm simply claiming what's mine. What happens to your reputation is your own doing." The doorbell rang, interrupting our confrontation. I answered it to find Emily standing there, looking as wretched as Robert. She'd clearly been crying all night, her beautiful face swollen and blotchy. "Margaret, please," she begged. "Can we talk? I need to explain." "There's nothing to explain, Emily. You're a 28-year-old woman who seduced your father-in-law. Or perhaps he seduced you? Either way, you're both adults who made conscious choices. You chose to betray my son, and you," I turned to Robert, "chose to betray everyone who ever loved you." Emily pushed past me into the house, desperation making her bold. "You don't understand. Robert and I, we fell in love. These things happen. You can't choose who you love." The audacity of her words took my breath away. "Love?" I repeated. "You think this is love? Love doesn't sneak around. Love doesn't lie to innocent people. Love doesn't destroy families. What you have is selfish lust, and you've both confused it for something noble." Robert stood up, trying to take control of the situation. "Margaret, if you pursue this divorce, if you take half the company, you'll destroy everything we've worked for. The business will suffer. The share price will drop. Employees could lose their jobs. Then you should have thought of that before you climbed into bed with our daughter-in-law," I replied coldly. "I've given you 40 years, Robert. I've given you my youth, my money, my career, my devotion, and you repaid me with the ultimate betrayal. So yes, I'm taking what's mine, and if that makes your life difficult, then perhaps you'll learn that actions have consequences. Emily collapsed onto the sofa, sobbing. What about Michael? Have you thought about what this will do to him? I rounded on her with fury I could no longer contain. What about Michael? You did this to Michael. You broke your marriage vows. You betrayed the man who loved you, who trusted you. Don't you dare try to make me the villain in this story. 1 week later, I sat in Mr. Harrison's oak-paneled office in central Portsmouth, surrounded by leather-bound law books and certificates of his 40 years in practice. He was a distinguished man in his late 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that had seen countless divorces, but even he seemed taken aback by the magnitude of this case. Mrs. Lewis, he began, spreading documents across his mahogany desk. I've completed the preliminary financial audit of Lewis Shipping. The findings are quite remarkable, and I must say they strongly support your claim. I leaned forward, my hands clasped calmly in my lap, despite the anticipation churning in my stomach. Tell me everything. Mr. Harrison adjusted his spectacles and picked up the first document. Your initial investment of $75,000 in 1985, adjusted for inflation, and considering the company's growth trajectory, would be worth approximately $890,000 today. However, that's just the beginning. He pulled out a second file, this one much thicker. I've documented your labor contributions from 1985 to 1995 when you worked full-time without salary. Had you been paid market rate for a company operations manager during that period, you would have earned approximately $450,000 in total compensation. Add inflation, and that's worth $1.2 million in today's money. The numbers were staggering, but I remained composed. Continue. From 1995 to 2010, you worked part-time while raising your son, but still contributed significantly to the business. Another $300,000 in unpaid labor, worth approximately $500,000 today. And then there's the opportunity cost, the architectural career you abandoned. Based on average earnings for architects with your qualifications over a 30-year period, you sacrificed approximately $1.5 million in potential income. I did the mental mathematics quickly. That's over $4 million before we even consider the current company value. Precisely, Mr. Harrison confirmed. Lewis Shipping Limited is currently valued at approximately $8.2 million, slightly higher than your initial estimate. Given your documented contributions and the marital assets accumulated during your marriage, I believe we can confidently claim 60% of the company, not 50. 60%. That would give me $4.92 million, plus the house, plus other assets. I would be set for life, comfortable and independent. More importantly, Robert would lose control of the company he'd built, or rather, that we'd built together. There's one complication, Mr. Harrison added, his expression growing serious. Mr. Lewis's solicitor has indicated he intends to fight this. He's claiming that your contributions were adequately compensated through your lifestyle during the marriage. The house, vacations, living expenses, etc. I felt anger flash through me. Adequately compensated? I built that business with him. I know, and we have the documentation to prove it. But Mrs. Lewis, I must warn you, this could get ugly. Divorce proceedings involving significant assets often do. Mr. Lewis may try to attack your character, question your motives, even contest the evidence of the affair. Let him try, I said firmly. I have photographs. I have testimony from the hospital about their simultaneous illness. His solicitor will have a hard time explaining that coincidence, and I have 40 years of financial records showing exactly what I contributed to that company. Mr. Harrison nodded approvingly. There's also the matter of Mrs. Emily Lewis, your daughter-in-law. Your son has indicated through his solicitor that he intends to file for divorce as well. If we coordinate our cases, we can establish a pattern of behavior that will be very difficult for the defendants to overcome. Michael has hired a solicitor? I asked, surprised and pleased. Yes, a very good one. Ms. Patricia Thornton. She's young but brilliant, and she's particularly passionate about cases involving infidelity. She's requested a meeting with both of you to discuss strategy. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Mom, can we meet? I've made some decisions. I texted back immediately. Having lunch at the Ship Inn at 1 o'clock. Join me. Mr. Harrison, I said, standing and smoothing my skirt. Proceed with full force. I want a forensic audit. I want depositions from the board members about Robert's conduct, and I want every penny I'm owed documented and claimed. This isn't just about money. It's about justice. He stood as well, extending his hand. Mrs. Lewis, in my 40 years of practice, I've never seen someone handle a situation like this with such grace and determination. Your husband made a grave mistake underestimating you. Yes, I agreed, shaking his hand firmly. He did. At the Ship Inn, a cozy pub overlooking Portsmouth Harbor, Michael was waiting for me at our favorite corner table. He looked older somehow, as if the revelation about his wife and father had aged him years in just days. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face drawn, but there was something else there too, a hardness, a resolve I'd never seen before. I embraced him tightly, feeling him shake slightly in my arms. "How are you holding up, darling?" "I'm surviving," he said, his voice rough. "Mum, I need to tell you something. I've been doing some investigating of my own." We sat down, and a waitress brought us menus, but neither of us looked at them. Michael pulled out his phone and showed me a series of photographs, Emily and Robert together at various locations around Portsmouth, a restaurant in South Sea, a hotel in Havant, walking hand in hand along the seafront. "I hired a private investigator 3 days ago," Michael explained. "These photos were taken over the past 6 months. They've been incredibly careless, Mum. They weren't even trying to hide it well." I studied each photo, feeling a mixture of vindication and disgust. Where did he get these? Social media, security cameras, witnesses. Apparently they've been seen together frequently. The investigator also discovered something else. He hesitated, pain flashing across his face. Emily made several large withdrawals from our joint account, totaling about $30,000 over the past 6 months. £30,000? I repeated, shocked. What did she spend it on? Michael's jaw clenched. The investigator tracked some of it. She bought Dad expensive gifts, a Rolex watch, designer clothes, paid for hotel rooms. She was spending my money to conduct an affair with my father. The audacity of it was breathtaking. "Michael, this is excellent evidence for your divorce proceedings." "That's what Ms. Thornton said," he confirmed. 2 weeks after my discovery, Lewis Shipping Limited held an emergency board meeting. Robert had tried to keep me away from it, but as I'd reminded him through Mr. Harrison, I was still legally his wife and a founding contributor to the company. More importantly, 3 of the 12 board members were old friends who remembered my contributions from the early days. I dressed carefully that morning, a navy Armani suit that conveyed authority, pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandmother, and the wedding ring I still wore out of spite more than sentiment. I wanted everyone in that boardroom to remember exactly who I was and what I'd sacrificed for Lewis Shipping. The company headquarters was a modern glass building overlooking Portsmouth Harbor, a far cry from the tiny rented office where Robert and I had started 4 decades ago. I remembered painting those walls myself, assembling furniture from IKEA, answering phones while simultaneously managing accounts. Every brick of this empire had been built on my labor, my money, my dreams deferred. The receptionist's eyes widened when I walked in. "Mrs. Lewis, I didn't know you'd be attending today's meeting." "Neither did my husband, I suspect," I replied with a cool smile. "But here I am nonetheless." The boardroom was on the top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the harbor. 12 men and women, investors, business leaders, financial experts, sat around an oval table. Robert was at the head, looking decidedly uncomfortable when I entered. The seat beside him, traditionally reserved for the CEO's spouse at special meetings, was conspicuously empty. I sat down in it without asking permission. "Margaret," Robert said tightly, "this is a closed board meeting. Company business." "Yes, Robert," I replied pleasantly. "The company I helped found. The company built partially with my inheritance. The company whose accounts I managed for a decade without compensation. I believe that gives me every right to be here." One of the board members, Charles Pemberton, an old friend who'd known us since the beginning, spoke up. "Actually, Robert, Mrs. Lewis has a valid point. Given the current circumstances, perhaps it would be wise to hear what she has to say." Robert's face reddened, but he couldn't argue without appearing unreasonable. "Fine. Margaret, you have 5 minutes." I stood, commanding the room's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'll be brief. I'm sure you've all heard rumors about recent events in my personal life with Robert. I'm here to confirm those rumors and to explain their implications for this company." A murmur rippled through the board members. I continued, my voice steady and clear. 2 weeks ago, I discovered that my husband was having an affair with our daughter-in-law, Emily Lewis. This affair had been ongoing for 6 months. I have photographic evidence, witness statements, and financial records showing expenditures related to this affair. I'm sharing this with you not for sympathy, but because it demonstrates a profound lack of judgment from your CEO. Robert stood abruptly. Margaret, that's enough. Sit down, Robert, Charles Pemberton said sharply. Let her finish. I nodded gratefully to Charles and continued. A man who would betray his wife, his son, and his family has already shown he's willing to prioritize personal desires over loyalty and integrity. What assurance do you have that he won't make similarly poor judgments in his business dealings? The silence in the room was profound. I let my words sink in before delivering the final blow. Furthermore, I've instructed my solicitor to begin divorce proceedings and to claim my rightful share of this company, 60%, based on my documented financial and labor contributions over 40 years. I have the documentation to prove every penny I invested, every hour I worked, and every opportunity I sacrificed to build Lewis Shipping into what it is today. 60%? Exclaimed Margaret Chen, the company's CFO. That would mean I become the majority shareholder, I confirmed, which means I would have controlling interest in all company decisions, including the position of CEO. Robert looked like he might have a heart attack. You can't do this. You'll destroy the company. No, Robert, I said calmly. I built this company. You're the one who's destroying it with your reckless behavior. The question now is whether this board will continue supporting a CEO who has demonstrated such catastrophically poor judgment, or whether they'll support a change in leadership that prioritizes the company's actual interests over personal indulgences. Charles cleared his throat. Margaret, what exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing that Robert steps down as CEO and accepts a limited role as a consultant. I will assume the position of chairwoman and work with the board to appoint a new CEO, someone without the baggage of scandal hanging over their head. In exchange, I'll reduce my claim from 60% to 51% of the company, giving Robert a minority stake and the other shareholders protection. It was a calculated offer, one Mr. Harrison and I had crafted carefully. By reducing my claim slightly, I appeared reasonable while still maintaining control. And by offering Robert a face-saving consultant position, I gave the board a way to support me without completely humiliating him. This is blackmail, Robert shouted. No, Margaret Chen said slowly, studying me with new respect. This is a business proposition. And frankly, Robert, it's more generous than you deserve. If Margaret pursues her full claim and the details of your affair become public during divorce proceedings, the company's reputation could suffer significantly. This way, we contain the scandal and maintain stability. The board meeting had adjourned with a vote scheduled for the following week. I'd returned home feeling a mixture of triumph and exhaustion, but there was no time to rest. Emily had been calling my phone repeatedly, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. I'd ignored them all, but that evening she showed up at my door. She looked terrible. Her once lustrous hair hung limp and unwashed, her designer clothes rumpled, her eyes wild with desperation. The beautiful young woman who'd captivated my husband had transformed into something broken and desperate. Margaret, please, she cried when I opened the door. Please, we need to talk. I've lost everything. Michael won't speak to me. My family has disowned me. And now I hear you're taking over the company? Please, you have to stop this. I stood in the doorway, blocking her entry. I don't have to do anything, Emily. You made your choices. Now you're living with the consequences. But I love him, she wailed. I love Robert. We didn't mean for this to happen, but we fell in love. Doesn't that count for something? I laughed, a harsh sound that surprised even me. Love? You're 28 years old, Emily. You married my son 6 years ago. You were barely married for 5 months before you started sleeping with his father. That's not love. That's opportunism. That's not fair. You don't know what it's like between Robert and me. He understands me in ways Michael never could. Stop, I said coldly. I don't want to hear your justifications. You destroyed my son's marriage. You destroyed my family. And for what? For a man old enough to be your father, who was willing to betray everyone who loved him for an ego boost? Emily grabbed my arm desperately. Margaret, I'm begging you. If you take the company, Robert will have nothing. We'll have nothing. How are we supposed to live? I pulled my arm away from her grasp. That is no longer my concern. You wanted Robert? Congratulations. You can have him, but not his company, not his money, and certainly not his comfortable life. You can have the man, stripped of everything my labor built for him. You're a monster, she screamed. You poisoned us. You're destroying lives for revenge. No, Emily, I replied quietly. I'm claiming what's mine. There's a difference, and as for the ipecac, you both survived a night of discomfort. I've survived 40 years of building a life that you destroyed in 6 months. I'd say we're far from even. A car pulled into the driveway behind Emily, Robert's Mercedes. He emerged looking as haggard as Emily, and together they made quite the pathetic pair. He strode up to the door, his former authority replaced by desperation. Margaret, I've been speaking with the board members individually, he said. Charles, Margaret Chen, David, they're all supporting your proposal. I'm finished at the company unless I agree to your terms. Then I suggest you agree to them, I replied. Damn it, Margaret, he exploded. This is my life's work. I built that company from nothing. We built that company, I shouted back, finally losing my composure. We, Robert. Or have you conveniently forgotten? Have you forgotten the $75,000 I gave you when the banks wouldn't? Have you forgotten the years I worked for free? Have you forgotten how I gave up my career, my dreams, everything to help you succeed? I would have succeeded anyway, he yelled. With or without your money, I would have built that company. The arrogance of his words took my breath away. You actually believe that, don't you? You've rewritten history in your mind so thoroughly that you genuinely think you did this alone. I walked into my study and returned with a file folder, throwing it at his feet. Papers scattered across the porch. Bank statements, investment documents, loan applications, rejection letters from every bank in Portsmouth. Read them, Robert, I demanded. Those are the letters rejecting your loan applications in 1985. Every single bank turned you down. You had no collateral, no track record, nothing. My inheritance was the only reason Lewis Shipping exists. And these, I grabbed a handful of invoices. These are the contracts I negotiated, the clients I sweet-talked, the accounts I managed. You think you did this alone? You wouldn't have lasted 6 months without me. Robert stared at the papers scattered at his feet, his face cycling through emotions, anger, denial, and finally, a flicker of recognition. But it was Emily who spoke next. If you loved him, you'd forgive him, she said desperately. Real love means forgiveness. I turned to her, and she actually flinched at the expression on my face. Don't you dare lecture me about love. I loved Robert for 40 years. I forgave his long hours, his obsession with work, his emotional distance. I forgave countless small betrayals, forgotten anniversaries, missed dinners, broken promises. But this isn't a mistake to forgive, Emily. This is a fundamental betrayal of everything marriage means. So you're going to destroy us both? Robert asked bitterly. No, I said, suddenly calm again. I'm going to take what's mine and move forward with my life. What happens to you two is your own responsibility. You want to be together? Fine, be together. But you'll do it without my money, without my company, and without my blessing. I started to close the door, but Emily's next words stopped me cold. I'm pregnant, she whispered. The world seemed to stop spinning. I stared at her flat stomach, at her tear-stained face, and felt something crack inside my chest. What did you say? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm pregnant, she repeated, louder now, almost defiantly. 3 months. It's Robert's baby. The pregnancy announcement changed everything and nothing simultaneously. I stood frozen on my doorstep, processing Emily's words while she and Robert watched me with a mixture of fear and defiance. A baby. My husband's child, with my daughter-in-law. The sheer perversity of the situation was almost incomprehensible. Get out, I said quietly. Margaret, Robert started. Get out, I screamed, surprising even myself with the violence of my emotion. Get away from my house, both of you. Get out of my sight. They fled to Robert's car, and I slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. Then I collapsed onto the floor of my foyer, 40 years of composure finally shattering. I sobbed, great, heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep and primal. A baby. There would be a baby, a permanent reminder of this betrayal, a child who would share Michael's DNA but not his parentage, a grotesque complication that would ensure this nightmare never truly ended. But as I cried on the floor of the home I'd built, something hardened inside me. If Emily thought a pregnancy would make me soften, make me forgive, She was gravely mistaken. If anything, it strengthened my resolve. This child would grow up knowing that its parents had destroyed a family to create it. I called Michael immediately, my voice still shaking. "Darling, I need to see you. Something's happened." An hour later, we sat in my study, and I watched my son's face as I told him Emily's news. He went pale, then green, then a deep, angry red. "A baby," he whispered. "She's pregnant with Dad's baby?" "That's what she claims," I said carefully. "But Michael, we only have her word for it. The timing is convenient, don't you think? She and Robert are facing total ruin, and suddenly she's pregnant? I think we need verification." Michael's solicitor, Ms. Patricia Thornton, agreed when I called her. "Mrs. Lewis, you're absolutely right to be suspicious. Request a paternity test. If she refuses, that tells us something. If she agrees and the child is Robert's, at least you'll know the truth. If it isn't, well, that opens up some interesting possibilities." Over the next week, through our solicitors, I formally requested that Emily submit to a non-invasive prenatal paternity test. These tests could be performed as early as 8 weeks of pregnancy using the mother's blood, with no risk to the baby. Emily initially refused, calling me heartless and cruel, but her solicitor eventually convinced her that refusing would only make her look guilty. The results took 2 weeks. 2 weeks of agonizing waiting, of imagining scenarios, of hoping against hope that Emily had lied, that this was just another manipulation. Mr. Harrison called me on a Thursday afternoon. "Mrs. Lewis, I have the results. You should sit down." I sat, my hands gripping the arms of my chair. "Tell me, the child is not Robert Lewis's biological offspring. The DNA results show 0 paternity match." I felt relief crash over me like a wave, followed immediately by white-hot rage. She lied. Emily lied about the pregnancy being Robert's? It appears so. However, she is pregnant. That part is true. But the father is someone else entirely. I thanked Mr. Harrison and immediately called Michael, then Charles Pemberton, then each board member of Lewis Shipping. Emily's lie was spectacular ammunition, and I intended to use every bit of it. The next board meeting was 3 days later, and this time I brought the paternity test results. I also brought Emily and Robert, subpoenaed by Mr. Harrison, to attend. When I entered the boardroom with documented proof that Emily had lied about the pregnancy to manipulate the situation, the atmosphere was electric. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, "I have new information that demonstrates the character, or lack thereof, of the people at the center of this situation." I distributed copies of the paternity test results. Robert's face drained of all color as he read. Emily, sitting beside him, began to cry. "Robert," he said, turning to her, "you told me it was mine. You swore it was mine." I thought it was," she stammered. "It could still be. Maybe the test is wrong." "DNA tests aren't wrong," Margaret Chen said coldly. "Ms. Lewis, you lied. You attempted to manipulate this situation using a fabricated claim of paternity. Who is the actual father?" Emily's sobs intensified, but she didn't answer. I pressed forward, sensing blood in the water. The question of paternity aside, this lie demonstrates exactly what we're dealing with. Ms. Lewis was willing to lie about something as significant as a child's parentage to manipulate the situation in her favor. And Robert, I turned to my husband, you were willing to believe her without question, to potentially claim another man's child as your own, all to maintain your relationship with her. Charles Pemberton shook his head. "Robert, I've known you for 30 years. I stood by you at your wedding. I invested in your company when it was just an idea, and I've defended you throughout this ordeal. But this is beyond redemption." Robert slumped in his chair, looking older than his 52 years. "Margaret, I didn't know. I swear I believed her." "That's precisely the problem," I replied. "Your judgment is so compromised by this woman that you didn't question an obvious manipulation. You're not fit to lead this company." The vote was unanimous. Robert would step down as CEO, accepting a consultant position at a fraction of his former salary. I would assume the position of chairwoman with 51% ownership of Lewis Shipping. The remaining shares would be distributed among the board, and Michael, who would join the company in a management position. "But what about me?" Emily cried. "What am I supposed to do? I have a baby coming. I need money." "That," I said coldly, "is between you and your actual baby's father, whoever he is. 3 months after that pivotal board meeting, I sat in Mr. Harrison's office for what we hoped would be the final settlement conference. The divorce proceedings had been brutal. Robert had fought for every penny, contested every claim, and dragged out the process as long as possible. But the evidence was overwhelming, and slowly, inevitably, he'd been forced to accept reality. The prenatal paternity test revelation had been devastating for his case. Not only did it prove Emily's willingness to lie and manipulate, but it also demonstrated Robert's catastrophically poor judgment. The board had already voted him out of the CEO position, and now he was facing the financial consequences of his choices. Mr. Harrison had assembled our final settlement proposal, and it was comprehensive. I would receive 51% of Lewis Shipping Limited, valued at approximately $18 million. The family home in Portsmouth, valued at $850,000. Half of all joint bank accounts and investments, approximately $620,000. Robert's pension contributions from our marriage, valued at $340,000. Total settlement value, approximately $6 million. Robert would retain 49% of Lewis Shipping Limited. I've valued at approximately $4 million. His consultant salary of $60,000 annually, his personal belongings, and his Mercedes. The disparity was significant, but justified by my documented contributions and his proven infidelity. Robert's solicitor, a sharp-eyed woman named Caroline Marsh, reviewed the proposal with barely concealed frustration. "Mrs. Lewis, this settlement is excessively punitive," she argued. "My client built this company. Your client built this company with my money, my labor, and my sacrificed career," I interrupted. "We have 40 years of documentation proving my contributions. We have photographs proving his affair. We have evidence of his catastrophically poor judgment regarding Ms. Emily Lewis's false pregnancy claim. If we go to trial, your client will be lucky to keep 49%. Robert sat beside Ms. Marsh, looking defeated. The past 3 months had aged him considerably. Emily had left him 2 weeks after the paternity revelation. Apparently her affections had cooled significantly when it became clear Robert was no longer a wealthy man. The baby's actual father had been revealed as a colleague from Emily's former workplace, a detail that added another layer of humiliation to the entire situation. "Just sign it," Robert said quietly to his solicitor. "It's over. I just want this to be over." "Ms." Marsh looked at him in surprise. "Robert, you can't." "I said sign it," he repeated, his voice empty. "Margaret's right. I destroyed everything. The least I can do is accept the consequences." There was no triumph in that moment, only sadness. I'd won, but the victory tasted of ashes. 40 years of marriage ended in a solicitor's office with the scratch of pens on paper. The man I'd loved, reduced to a shell of himself, signing away the life we'd built together. But then I remembered walking into that guest room. I remembered seeing him with Emily. I remembered the lies, the betrayal, the casual cruelty of their affair. My sympathy evaporated. "There's one more thing," I said, as Robert reached for the pen. "Michael." Robert looked up, pain flashing across his face at his son's name. "What about him?" "Michael is joining Lewis Shipping as operations director, with a salary of $95,000 and a 10% stake in the company, purchased from your shares at fair market value. That will reduce your holding to 39%. It's non-negotiable." Robert's hands trembled as he held the pen. "My son is taking my place in the company I built?" "No," I corrected gently. "Your son is taking his rightful place in the company we built, the company you threw away for an affair. Michael deserves this opportunity, and he deserves it in a company where he won't have to face his father every day. You'll be a consultant, working primarily from home. He'll be in the office, learning the business, building his future." "You're erasing me," Robert whispered. "No," I replied. "I'm giving my son the opportunities you denied him by destroying our family. Now sign." He signed. Every page, every clause, every surrender of the life he'd known. When it was done, Mr. Harrison collected the documents, and Robert stood to leave. "Margaret," he said, turning at the door, "for what it's worth, I am sorry. I know you won't believe me, but I am genuinely sorry for the pain I caused you." I looked at him, this man I'd loved for 40 years, this stranger who'd betrayed me, and felt nothing. "Goodbye, Robert." He left, and I was alone with Mr. Harrison in his oak-paneled office. The solicitor looked at me with something like awe. "Mrs. Lewis, in 40 years of practice, I've never seen someone handle a situation like this with such precision and determination. You've secured your financial future, protected your son's interests, and held the guilty parties accountable. How do you feel?" How did I feel? I searched inside myself for an answer and found complexity beyond words. Relief, certainly. Vindication, absolutely. But also grief for the 40 years that had ended, sadness for the love that had died, and yes, a certain grim satisfaction that justice had been served. "I feel like I can finally breathe," I answered honestly. "For 40 years, I built my life around Robert and his dreams. Now, for the first time since I was 22 years old, I'm free to discover what my dreams are." Mr. Harrison smiled. "Then I'd say you've won more than just the settlement, Mrs. Lewis. You've won yourself back." 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I stood in my new office at Lewis Shipping Limited, looking out over Portsmouth Harbor. The view was spectacular, ships coming and going, the water glittering in the morning sun, the whole busy maritime world spread before me. It was the same view Robert had enjoyed from this office for decades, but it felt different now. It felt like mine. Michael knocked on my door, entering with a tablet and his characteristic energy. At 28, he'd blossomed in his new role as operations director. The pain of his divorce from Emily was still there. I saw it sometimes in quiet moments, but he'd channeled it into work, into building something meaningful from the wreckage of his marriage. "Morning, Mum," he said, kissing my cheek. "I've got the quarterly reports ready for your review, and the shipping contracts for the Southampton route need your approval." I smiled at him, feeling pride swell in my chest. "You've done remarkable work these past months, darling. The board is thrilled with the efficiency improvements you've implemented." "I learned from the best," he replied, gesturing to me. "You built this company as much as Dad did. More, actually. I never realized until all this happened how much you'd sacrificed." We spent the morning reviewing documents, discussing strategy, planning for the company's future. Lewis Shipping was more profitable than ever under my leadership. I'd brought in fresh perspectives, improved employee relations, and negotiated several lucrative new contracts. The scandal that Robert had feared would destroy the company had instead become a story of resilience and renewal. At lunch, I met with Charles Pemberton at our favorite cafe near the harbor. He greeted me with a warm hug, his weathered face creasing into a smile. "Margaret, you're glowing. Leadership suits you." "Thank you, Charles. I have to admit, I'm enjoying it more than I expected. There's something liberating about finally being recognized for the work I've always done." "Any regrets?" he asked gently. I considered the question seriously. "About the divorce? No. About how I had to fight for what was mine? No. About losing 40 years of my life to someone who betrayed me so thoroughly? Yes, I regret that. But I can't change the past. I can only shape my future." "And Robert? Have you heard from him?" I hadn't seen Robert since the settlement conference, though I heard updates through mutual acquaintances. He'd moved to a small flat in Fareham, living on his consultant salary, and the dividends from his reduced shares. Emily had married her baby's father in a quiet ceremony. Apparently, he was a middle manager at an insurance company, a far cry from the wealthy lifestyle she'd envisioned with Robert. "He sent me a letter last month," I admitted. Apologizing again, asking if we could perhaps have coffee, talk about old times. I didn't respond. "Too painful?" Charles asked sympathetically. "No," I said thoughtfully. "Too pointless. What would we talk about? The life he destroyed? The trust he shattered? Some betrayals are too profound to move past, Charles. And I've discovered something wonderful. I don't need his presence in my life to be happy. For 40 years I thought I did. But I was wrong. That evening, I hosted a dinner party at my home, the house I'd won in the divorce, the house I'd made into a space that was purely mine. I'd redecorated completely, erasing every trace of Robert, every memory of our shared life. The guest room where I'd discovered the affair had been converted into a home office. The master bedroom had new furniture, new colors, a new energy. My guests included Michael, Charles and his wife, several board members from Lewis Shipping, and my sister, Catherine, who'd flown in from Scotland. We drank excellent wine. No ipecac this time, I joked, to laughter. Ate wonderful food, and celebrated not just my professional success, but my personal rebirth. "A toast," Catherine announced, raising her glass. "To my sister Margaret, who proved that it's never too late to claim what's yours, to start over, and to show the world what you're truly capable of. Everyone raised their glasses, and I felt emotions swell in my throat. Thank you, all of you, for supporting me through the darkest period of my life. What Robert and Emily did was devastating, but in destroying my old life, they inadvertently freed me to build a new one. I'm 62 years old, and I'm happier now than I've been in decades. Michael stood, his eyes suspiciously bright, to Mum, who taught me that strength isn't about never falling, it's about always getting back up, and that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well. As the evening wound down and my guests departed, I stood alone in my living room, looking at the life I'd created, the company I now controlled, the son I'd protected and empowered, the independence I'd finally claimed, the future that was entirely mine to shape. My phone buzzed with a message from Mr. Harrison. Mrs. Lewis, I wanted you to know, the architectural firm of Thames & Thames is looking for a senior consultant. They specifically requested your name, having heard about your background and business acumen. Interested? Architecture. The dream I'd abandoned 40 years ago for Robert's shipping business, the career I'd sacrificed, the passion I'd buried. And now, at 62, someone was offering me a chance to reclaim it, not as a young graduate starting from scratch, but as an accomplished businesswoman with decades of experience. I typed back immediately, very interested. Please arrange a meeting. As I prepared for bed that night, I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the shock of discovery, the rage that had fueled my initial revenge, the cold determination that had driven me through the divorce proceedings, the satisfaction of finally being recognized for my contributions. And now, this new beginning, full of possibilities I'd thought were lost forever. Some people might say I'd been too harsh, too unforgiving, that I should have worked to save my marriage, to forgive Robert's mistake, to put family first. But those people didn't know what it felt like to discover 4 decades of loyalty repaid with ultimate betrayal. They didn't know the rage of being invisible, undervalued, taken for granted while giving everything. I'd taken what was mine, not out of revenge, though that had certainly been satisfying, but out of justice. I'd built Lewis Shipping as much as Robert had, and I'd claimed my rightful share. I'd protected my son from further harm. I'd held the guilty parties accountable for their actions. And now, finally, I was free. Free to pursue dreams I'd thought were dead. Free to build a life defined by my choices, not someone else's needs. Free to discover who Margaret Lewis was when she wasn't orbiting around someone else's son. I am 62 years old. I am the majority owner and chairwoman of a multi-million-pound shipping company. I am a survivor of betrayal who refused to be destroyed by it. I am a mother who protected her son. I am a woman who finally chose herself. And I am, against all odds, happy. If you've stayed with me through this entire journey, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. This story has been my truth, my catharsis, my way of making sense of the most painful experience of my life. Please, like this video and subscribe to my channel. I have more stories to tell, more wisdom to share, more proof that it's never too late to reclaim your life. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love knowing that my story has reached people all around the world, that perhaps it's given someone else the courage to stand up for themselves, to claim what's theirs, to refuse to be a victim. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting me. And remember, betrayal may break your heart, but it doesn't have to break your spirit. Sometimes, the best revenge truly is living well.